Thank you all for coming today to this information session on the D2R Postdoctoral Scholar Awards. We'll just give it a couple minutes to make sure everyone can log into Zoom so we can hold the session for as many participants as possible. Thanks. Okay, so the number of participants seems to have stabilized, so we'll get going. So before I get into discussing the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards within the D2R Initiative, I wanted to give you a brief introduction to myself. So I'm Anthony. I'm D2R's Training Program Officer. But importantly, for the context of the discussion today, prior to this, I was both a doctoral student at McGill and for a short period of time, a postdoc at McGill as well. So that's kind of the perspective I bring to my current position working at D2R, kind of interfacing with any trainee targeted initiatives. In terms of the focus for today's session, first, if you're not familiar, I'll give you a brief introduction about the D2R initiative and direct you to our website for more details if you're interested in learning more while preparing your application. As well, then I will get into some specific details about the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards, as well as the complementary D2R training program. And finally, before a Q&A session, I will provide some specific guidance to help you prepare your application and tailor it for this competition. And I'll just mention it at the top and reiterate it later on. For the Q&A, we ask you to please use the Zoom Q&A function to input your questions, or during the Q&A session, which will happen at the end of the webinar, request to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question out loud. And so if a question comes up to you as the session's going, feel free to input it in the Zoom Q&A function and not in the chat. And I'll remind you of this again later once we get to the Q&A. And so to start off today, I wanted to give you a brief introduction about the D2R initiative itself. So the D2R Initiative, or DNA to RNA, an inclusive Canadian approach to genomic-based RNA therapeutics, is an initiative hosted at McGill alongside several partner institutions that's funded by the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. And so this is a funding program designed to allow universities to turn things that are already strong disciplines at the university into world-leading initiatives. And D2R was able to receive funding from CFREF from starting in 2023 and carrying us through 2030. And so the vision for this D2R initiative is to deliver genomic-based RNA therapies to benefit the health of different populations affected by infectious, rare, and neglected diseases, or those who have common chronic diseases such as cancer. So as I will reiterate several times today, the key research being done in D2R is around genomic-based RNA therapeutic development and the associated elements of that. And so in this kind of research space, I'll share with you kind of the research framework for D2R, or the research pipeline. And so this is important when you're thinking about preparing your application for the Postdoctoral Scholar Program, as we ask that your research that's being funded by D2R, if you successfully receive the award, is aligned with D2R. So it's important to have a good idea of what D2R aligned research is before you even think about preparing an application to ensure you don't, for example, waste your time because the research project that you're going to be working on isn't aligned with D2R. And so within several priority disease areas, which I mentioned in the vision, but I'll reiterate on the next slide, D2R's research really takes you through everything from the discovery of biomarkers and targets, target prioritization, and then developing vaccines and drugs for these identified targets through the genomic-based research. And then also kind of some bioengineering elements in terms of synthesis, bioprocessing, and delivery of these therapeutics, and then attempting to accelerate the clinical use and therapeutic implementation of this research. So for a little more idea of what this might look like in practice, D2R has some large research funding programs that might hope to take some discoveries all the way from one end of this pipeline to the other, while smaller programs such as the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards, which we're discussing today, might fund projects that kind of fall at different points along this pipeline. So you might be working on encapsulating RNA therapeutics in a lipid nanoparticle, for example, and that's how you're aligned with D2R. Importantly, there are some other aspects that kind of cut across this entire pipeline, and those are incorporating important policy and social determinants of health considerations, so bringing a social science perspective into the research being done in D2R, as well as making sure data science practices are well thought out and well implemented across all D2R research projects, as well as supporting high throughput platforms and technologies. For example, this could be through the development of technologies that can be used by other groups or the support of core platforms. And so in the end, all the research, as I kind of alluded to in the vision statement that's going on under D2R, is looking to benefit all Canadians in terms of improving genomic medicine and through RNA therapeutics. And so to give you a better idea how to position your research, we ask specifically in the application to orient your research under at least one of D2R's foundational axes. And these foundational axes kind of cover more explicitly different stages along the research pipeline I discussed on the previous slide. So for example, your research could fall under population studies in genomic medicine, axis 1, axis 2, RNA therapeutics, or as you go down axis 3, more of an engineering angle, a clinical research angle, more data science, bioinformatics, or a social science perspective through axis 6. And so this is important, as was outlined on the online call for applications for this program. You must demonstrate that your research is aligned with the D2R as a prerequisite for funding through the D2R Postdoctoral Scholar Awards. An added benefit is if your research falls under one of D2R's current 3 priority disease areas, being infectious diseases, precision cancer therapy, and therapies targeting rare diseases. And so if you're interested in having a bit more of an idea of what falls under these foundational axes, please go to the D2R website, as there's a little more detail on what is included within each of these. And so alongside, it's not just McGill University, obviously, that is involved in D2R. D2R has many private sector partners, academic partners, and public sector partners. Important for the conversation today is to highlight that D2R has 5 partner academic institutions that you can apply from, as long as you are working with a D2R eligible researcher. And so those are UBC, U Ottawa, McMaster, University of Sherbrooke, and IRCM. And I'll get into a little more detail about what that means later on when we discuss specific eligibility considerations. And so hopefully that gives you a little taste of what D2R is all about and the research we are trying to support. And I will now hone in a little more specifically on the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards themselves. So within D2R, D2R is looking to support and train both graduate students and postdocs who are working on D2R aligned research projects, as this is an essential step to ensure that the D2R initiative has a long-term impact and is sustained past the funding end date. And so two ways in which D2R is looking to support trainees are both through financial support as well as developmental and training support through the D2R Training Program. And so financial support angle, there are kind of two ways that D2R is currently looking to fund trainees. So these are both graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. So starting last year in the first round and continuing in the second round of D2R grants that evaluation is currently ongoing for, there are built-in training award budgets into the program grants. So these are grants given at the PI level, and the trainees working on those projects can receive funding specifically to fund, for example, their stipend as a grad student or their salary as a postdoc. And so a couple example programs that our D2R is running that have training awards built in are the Foundational and Research in Motion programs and the Translational Impact Research program. Now, distinct from these PI funded funding that's going to PIs and then filtering down to the trainees, D2R is now launching the Scholar Awards, which many of you, I hope, since you're here today, are interested in learning more about. And so this is the highest recognition available to D2R trainees and is looking to award outstanding and active trainees across all of D2R's foundational axes. So we're not looking to only support people working in genomic research or RNA therapeutics specifically. We're also looking to support people working on D2R aligned projects that aren't necessarily in labs who are already receiving D2R funding. And so importantly as well, I'll highlight that the master's and doctoral version, if you will, of the Scholar Awards launched earlier in the summer, and it's currently in the evaluation phase. And then, of course, as you're aware, we've recently launched the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards. Now, both of these contingents of trainees will be expected to participate in the D2R training program and receive developmental support. But I wanted to highlight that even if you're here today and interested in D2R and aren't one of the select few who are chosen to be awarded a Scholar Award, or you're working in a lab that isn't currently supported by D2R funds, this training program will be open to participation from trainees within the McGill and the D2R community if they would like to participate. And so the trainings won't be restricted just to funded trainees, but if you're interested in learning more about an individual training or the training program in general, we welcome you to attend. And so to give you a better idea of what this D2R training program will look like, this will be starting in fall 2025, leading edge interdisciplinary training that is designed to complement your research activities and obviously previous coursework and training you've received during your PhD, and provide like guidance towards other available training opportunities. And so these will be a small number of mandatory training events, for example, an orientation, EDI training, data science training, attending the D2R Research Symposium, and customizable additional elements. So this might be specific topics, for example, in a specific interest in biomanufacturing or attending specific D2R seminars that are hosted on a regular basis. And so the objectives of this training program are threefold: to help you improve as a researcher, help you become an active member of the collaborative D2R research community. We're really trying to build a community that not only has PIs in it, but trainees as grad students and postdoctoral researchers as well, and help you gain skills and experience looking forward for you to help build your career. And so now that I have laid out kind of a general introduction to D2R, as well as an overview of the training program, I wanted to get into some specific details that you probably should already be aware of if you've looked at the online call for applications for the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards, but I wanted to highlight some specific points for you today. So the application deadline for this program is August 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, with an anticipated results announcement coming this fall as well. And so what the award entails is $70,000 per year for 2 years. And so this will also, on top of the 70K, will include benefits, as is the norm, for example, at McGill for postdocs. And so one caveat is that we are going to have about a 6-month start date window that is anticipated to be from November 1st, 2025 to April 30th, 2026. So for example, if you don't think that you can start your postdoc during this range, like for example, if you're not going to be done your PhD in time, or you don't think you'd be able to have your visa to come to McGill and to Quebec to work on your postdoctoral research during a 6-month start date window that will be roughly in this time frame. I highly encourage you to maintain contact with D2R, but potentially to apply to next year's competition if you don't feel that this 6-month start date window is something that's realistic for you to hit. Now, so I say this is anticipated. This might be pushed back slightly, but this is a general guide that you should follow when deciding if you're going to submit an application for this competition. And so in terms of more general eligibility, I will go through some selected requirements today that are kind of expanded on versions or just elaboration on what can be found online. But if you have a specific question about your eligibility, please email d2rtraining@mcgill.ca. As today in the question and answer, we're looking to answer questions that are general to a large audience. But if you have a very specific question, I might skip over it during the Q&A section if we have a lot of questions, but I will definitely be able to provide you with a better answer and a more complete answer if you email us that question about your specific eligibility. And so more generally, we're looking for people who are registered as a postdoc for the entire duration of the award. So this month means that you must be within 5 years of PhD completion, effectively still in spring 2028. So this is because the award is going roughly from spring 2026 to spring 2028, and you have to still be a postdoc, a registered postdoc at your host institution during that entire time, which, for example, at McGill means you're within 5 years of PhD completion. So unfortunately, through this program, we are not going to be able to support research associates. Of course, your proposed research must be aligned with the overall goals of D2R and be tied to at least one of D2R's foundational axes, as I outlined earlier. Now, this is one area where I'll mention this again later. It's on you to convince the evaluators reading your application that your research is aligned with D2R. So even you might want to reach out with a question about if something's eligible in terms of its research scope. I might be able, or someone else at D2R might be able to give you some guidance, but the onus is really on the applicant to convince the person reading their application that their research is well aligned with D2R. And this program is open to Canadian or international researchers, but alongside, and it's not a surprise that with the $70K per year salary and award associated with this, you cannot hold another fellowship in combination with the Postdoctoral Scholar Award. So at the time of application, importantly, as an applicant, you must have a designated supervisor or written commitment from a supervisor at McGill or one of D2R's partner institutions. So this means that you have to have your supervisor effectively sponsor or support your application. And so in terms of what this means at partner institutions, you must be supervised by a D2R eligible PI. So there are lists of researchers at the partner institutions, so UBC, UOttawa, McMaster, Sherbrooke, and IRCM, who are approved to be D2R eligible researchers. So I'll get into this a little more on the next slide, but basically the supervisor that you're hoping to work with should know if they are D2R eligible, and if not, and if you're not sure, please just email us and we'll quickly clarify that for you. And an important note I wanted to highlight here at the bottom of this slide is that in this competition, PIs are limited to supporting one application only. So if you are contacting a PI, or if you're working with a PI, they'll only be able to support one applicant in their lab towards the postdoctoral scholar competition. And so there's no risk of you, since there are elements of the application that your PI has to complete, there's not a risk necessarily of you preparing your whole application, submitting it, and then learning from us that your PI has submitted 2 applications. But I would bring it to the attention of your PI that they're only eligible and able to support one application in this competition. And this is because we are looking to spread out the funds across many different research groups. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple questions that we received in the registration form for the webinar today that were asked by multiple people. So what if you haven't completed your PhD yet? So for this, you can apply, but of course, to be able to hold the award, you will have to have successfully defended your PhD before beginning your postdoc, as is required. But you also must be able to start your postdoc in the start date period and have a letter of support from your postdoc supervisor. So your supervisor to be has to choose your application to be the one they sponsor for this competition, and to be given and hold the award, you have to start in that 6-month window. So again, is my supervisor a D2R eligible researcher? I want to highlight that if they are based at McGill, yes, they are. If they are at a D2R partner institution, maybe, and your supervisor will know if they are on the list of D2R eligible researchers, or if you're not sure and they're not sure, just email us and we'll clarify that for you. Now, the last question was that we received from multiple people was, can I work with my previous supervisor? For example, can I continue working on a similar project to my PhD in the same lab? Technically, we're not preventing you from applying. However, one of the awarding, there's several kind of awarding priorities, one of which, and one of the objectives of the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards is to bring outstanding researchers from Canada and abroad to the D2R initiative. So what this means effectively is during the awarding process, preference will be given to applicants who, one, have not yet started working in the group of their supporting supervisor, or have been in their current postdoctoral position for less than 6 months at the time of application. I will note here, so this isn't if you just started in your lab and you're not sure if the 6-month start date window for the award will fall and you want to know if you're going to be prioritized. It's at the time of application that we're looking for to prioritize or prefer applicants who have started less than 6 months ago. And people or prioritize or prefer people completed their doctoral studies at institutions outside of McGill and D2R partner institutions. So this, if you, for example, did your PhD at McGill and are doing your postdoc in a different lab, this doesn't mean that this will affect the actual evaluation scoring of your proposal at all. It just means at the awarding stage, if your application and another application are evaluated equally, the committee making the awarding decision may choose to elevate the application that fits into these awarding priorities. And so I wanted to highlight some equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations for you before we start specific elements of the application itself. That's because EDI is at the core of D2R and is placed as a high priority in all of its initiatives. And so in this competition, all applicants must complete the D2R self-identification survey. So this is a survey that's linked through the call for applications on the website, and in the application form, you will have to check a box to say that you did complete it. And of course, in this survey, actually providing answers is optional. You can choose not to declare in all or some categories, but we do require you to complete the survey. Additionally, I wanted to highlight that successfully awarded postdoctoral scholars will have to receive training in EDI to support the integration of EDI into their research design. Additionally, in this competition, we welcome and strongly encourage applications from those of you from equity deserving groups. And in the application, you're encouraged to signal any leave that may have affected your productivity. So you'll notice that there's an optional form or page you can submit detailing your leave. So this is where you'd be encouraged to signal any leave that you feel might provide more context to the rest of your application. Additionally, persons with disabilities that may need accommodation during the application process, please contact D2R in confidence and we'll look to help you in any way that we can have fair access to the application. As well, I wanted to let you know that all expert evaluators for this competition will receive guidance to ensure equitable evaluation of all applications. And so now that those details are through, I'll take you through a description of the different components of the application and give you hopefully some tips and tricks that will help you tailor your application for specifically this D2R competition. So in this application, there's an online application form. As I mentioned, on this form, you'll have to confirm that you have completed the separate D2R self-identification survey, as well as we ask you to put in the name and contact information for two referees who are responsible for submitting reference letters on your behalf. And there are several different documents to upload. And so I'll please follow the format requirements for these documents, and I'll walk you through each of these documents in a little bit more detail on the coming slides. However, I did want to highlight that even once you've had all these documents prepared, the application form itself will take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. So please, at 4:55 on August 29th, please don't start filling out the application form, even if you have your documents ready, as you might risk hitting the 5 p.m. deadline before submitting your application. In the online application form itself, there are a couple key areas I wanted to highlight. One is that you want to ensure your application is actually reviewed by experts in your own field. And so how you can do that is properly select the D2R foundational axes that is truly best aligned with your research proposal, and include 5 keywords that describe your project, as this is what the D2R team will use to form different evaluation groups and send them to evaluators working in a similar research field as yours, who will be best at evaluating, for example, your methods section. As well, the form allows you to learn how you will be able to participate in the D2R community, or how some ways we're looking for postdocs and other trainees to participate. And so here we ask that you identify your desired contribution to the training community, and this is selecting from a list of potential options before explaining further in your letter of motivation. So what this effectively means, and what I suggest you do, is that you take a look at the application form, see the different things we're looking for you to potentially select in terms of how you'd like to participate, and then incorporate those as you prepare your letter of motivation to link these different components of your application. Now, moving on to the specific elements and documents that you have to upload in the application form. The first of them is the research proposal. So the research proposal is worth 40% of the evaluation of your application and must be no longer the actual proposal itself, including figures, can't be more than 2 pages, but reference letters can be included on an additional page. And there are some other specific formatting requirements that are outlined on the online call for applications. And so for the evaluation of your research proposal, the 3 subheaded sections that we request, the background and rationale, research plan and methods, and D2R alignment sections, along with a score for overall quality, are each weighed equally during the evaluation. So now I'll kind of take you through each of these different elements. Now, if you've completed your PhD or almost completing your PhD, I'm sure you're more aware of what goes into a background and rationale section than, for example, a junior master's student. But I wanted to provide you with some details about, for example, what's actually in the rubric that the evaluators are using. So what things should you be sure to include in the specific tailored background and rationale section, for example, for the research proposal for this competition. And so the background and rationale is where you should provide context to the reviewer about why your research project is important. So what is known in the field that's relevant to your project? What is not known that you want to learn? And why is learning this important? And why are you, and specifically your research group, ideally suited to study this problem? And of course, please cite important references in your field throughout this section. In terms of the research plan and methods, this is where you should outline clearly what your objectives are for the project and how you will achieve them. And so, or your plan to achieve them anyway. So we look for you to outline your research objectives, explain how each objective contributes to the overall project. And so this should be organized in a logical order and use visuals where appropriate, as I mentioned, because there's an overall quality score that will really likely be where evaluators consider how well organized your proposal is. And so you should clearly communicate for each objective what method or strategy you will employ and why that strategy or method is well suited to achieve the goals. And again, ensure that this entire section is cohesive. In terms of the D2R alignment section, this is where we're asking you to tie your research to, for sure, to the D2R's foundational axes or axis or axes that are best aligned with your project. As I mentioned, this is a requirement for funding. However, if you can also link it with a priority disease area, that might lead to your research being even more viewed as being well aligned with D2R. And so I'll highlight again, a clear link made by the applicant for the reviewer is required to be funding in this competition. And so moving on from the research proposal to the letter of motivation, in this section, this is worth 20% of the application evaluation. And so this letter of motivation is included as the Scholar Awards are designed for trainees who want to both take advantage of the D2R training program and who want to be active members of the D2R community. So this is not a program that's looking to fund people who are only interested in performing their research project on a daily basis. We're looking really to recruit people to be funded through the Scholar Awards who want to become members of this active, vibrant D2R community. And so in this letter, we'd like you to explain and be specific about your career goals and how being a postdoctoral scholar will help you achieve them. And here I wanted to highlight that we've asked reviewers not to specifically evaluate your goals, but simply evaluate how well you connect your career goals with being a D2R postdoctoral scholar. So this is important. Like, for example, if you're doing a postdoc and you know the classical route of after a postdoc is academia, but that's not the path that you'd like to take, be honest and explain, and maybe mention, for example, how the links with industry that D2R has might help you move out of the academic research space. So the reviewers are asked not to evaluate your goals. And so the next element we'd like you to include is mentioning how would you like to contribute to the training program and the community. And so as I mentioned earlier, there are ideas for this in the application form that include attending events, joining a trainee committee that we will be forming in the fall, or alternatively, for example, performing research that will create a database for the whole community, for example. But please feel free to include things that you are truly passionate that you feel could benefit the community as a whole, as well as what you would as how you'd like to contribute. We'd like you to expand on what you hope to gain from being a D2R scholar and from the training program. And so we're looking for concrete ideas of how you want to benefit. So of course, this can be tied to number one, so tied to your career goals, or maybe you specifically enjoy becoming a member of a community and you'd like to elaborate on how becoming a member of a community or developing a research collaboration might help you in that. Will be assisted by being part of this program. And so I just wanted to mention that during the evaluation of the Master's and Doctoral Scholar Awards, people who kind of made, similar to the research proposal, made subheadings within their letter to kind of make it clear that they've included these elements, that seemed to be well received by reviewers. And so organizing your letter of motivation in some way that highlights these different sections that the reviewers are looking for might be helpful for the evaluation of your letter of motivation. And so we also ask you to include a biosketch. And so for this, we ask you to use the format provided, as well as alongside that, submitting all of your official transcripts combined as one PDF document. And so in the biosketch itself, we ask you to include efforts you have made to communicate your research outside of academic journals. So of course, include any publications that you've had the opportunity to be on, but as well include presentations, articles, other ways you've tried to distribute your research, as well as we're asking for you to not only focus on academic contributions, but also include things like community outreach and non-academic achievements. And so one of the other elements that wasn't included in the Master's and Doctoral Scholar Award application package, but is included here, are reference letters. So 2 reference letters that together are worth 10% of the evaluation score. So you as the applicant are responsible for contacting 2 referees to submit reference letters on your behalf. And these reference letters must be submitted on institutional letterhead through the reference letter submission form. And we ask for this to be done before the application deadline. So when you're contacting your references, please specify them to one, use the reference letter submission form, which can be found in the online call for applications and linked through that, as well as submit their reference letter before the application deadline, August 29th. However, we've also asked you to please provide the name and contact information for the referees in the application form, and this will allow us at the D2R office to reach out to them if need be. And so the final component of the application package is a declaration and commitment form. So if you've looked at this form, it's a form that you'll have to download from the website and together is worth 10% of your application. So this is a form where both the applicant and supervisor agree to some things, for example, active participation in the D2R training program. And so we ask you to sign this, as well as there's a section on this form where the supervisor is asked to write up to 1 page, clearly outlining 3 things. And so this is the component that is evaluated. So this will be 10% of the evaluation. We're looking for your supervisor to be for your postdoc. So this is not your PhD supervisor. This is the supervisor sponsoring the application for the Postdoctoral Scholar Award. We want them to outline why you as an applicant are an ideal fit to work on this project, why their research group is well suited for the performance of this project, and how they as a supervisor will ensure that the applicant is supplied with the required training and resources to succeed. So we chose to include this element of the application because this award is basically giving the supervisor resources to have a postdoc working in their group for 2 years. So we felt that it was important that the supervisor also have a commitment and contribution to the application package. And so before we lead into the Q&A section, I just wanted to kind of summarize the general message of this session today, that if you are someone who is currently working on or will be working on a research project that is aligned with D2R, if you have a strong academic and research record and are interested in learning more about RNA therapeutics and genomic medicine research in a larger context, for example, folding in some social science and industry perspectives into your project, if you want to become an active member of the collaborative and inclusive and active D2R community, and especially if you're visualizing and planning your career, you are a prime candidate for applying for the D2R Postdoctoral Scholar Awards. So please apply by the deadline of August 29th. And if you do apply and excited to participate in D2R, but unfortunately aren't one of the select few who are able to be awarded a Postdoctoral Scholar Award this year, please continue to participate in D2R training program activities that will be open to everyone. And so now we're going to move into the question and answer period. And I see there are people populating the Q&A already, but I'd like you to remind you that please, you can ask questions using the Zoom Q&A function or by requesting to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask the question out loud. Okay, so now I will go into the Q&A and answer some questions. And of course, you have the option to ask your question anonymously or including your name. So, and I'll read the questions out for use to give context for the entire group about the question I'm answering. So an anonymous attendee asks, I saw that during the award process, you will prioritize those who are in a postdoc less than 6 months and haven't done prior studies at McGill. Is it still worth it for me to apply if I am not in those cases? So this, I hope I covered when I was describing this section. Yes, if you feel that your research is well aligned with D2R, and of course you'll be a postdoc still for the entire part of the entire duration of the award, so for 2 years from the starting date, I would suggest that if you feel your project is well aligned with D2R and you are interested in becoming part of the community and feel like you can prepare a compelling letter of motivation, it's definitely worth for you to apply, because if you're one of the top scored applicants, you will likely be awarded. And I hope that clears up any questions that kind of cover that. How many applicants? Another anonymous person asks, how many applicants are you targeting to fund in this cycle? So we're looking to, over the course of D2R, there's a kind of a number of postdocs that we have the funds to support. And of course, we're supporting postdocs as well through the training awards found in the PI grants. But in this cycle, we're looking to fund on the order of about 8 applicants. My project falls under several foundational axes. Should I focus on one in the research project description, or do you recommend mentioning several applicable axes? And so in this case, I would say that if you feel like in your 2-page proposal, you can successfully convince the reviewer thoroughly that you're aligned with different axes, I would suggest you do that. That does show that you are well aligned with D2R as a whole. However, I'll note that in the application form, you will have to specify a main axis and then multiple other axes. You can select as many of the other 5 axes as you want that you are aligned with. But that one main axis will largely be what's used to kind of bring your application into a specific area and evaluation group. So I would say really pay attention that you nail down that first axis, like for example, setting the context of where you see your application being evaluated. But there's no harm if you feel like you have a compelling argument that you are aligned to many axes, do highlight that in the actual D2R alignment section of your research proposal. Is there a requirement of the date of PhD diploma? McGill only allows postdoc status within 5 years of PhD graduation date. Yes, I hope that this is now clear, since when you type the question, you must be within 5 years of your PhD graduation date, so still registered as a postdoc for the entire duration of the award. So what this effectively means is that for this competition, since the end of it will be spring 2028, you have to have gotten your PhD at the you have to have received your PhD from spring 2023 up until now. So I hope that one's clear. And if you have any specific questions about your case, or for this question or any of these questions, please email us and we'll be able to give you a tailored response. Can a co-supervisor supply a letter of reference? So if this means a co-supervisor for your postdoc, yes, of course, the main contribution of your current postdoc supervisor will be that letter of commitment that is included in the declaration and commitment form. So really the reference letters likely aren't going to come from your current postdoc supervisor, but instead from, for example, your PhD supervisor or a researcher who was on your thesis committee from your PhD, or a collaborator. So a co-supervisor during your PhD is completely okay, or a co-supervisor if you've been in a postdoc for a significant period of time is okay, of course, okay for a reference letter as well. But I will highlight that probably the main contribution of your current postdoc supervisor will be that part of the commitment form. Another anonymous person asks, so this is someone asking if they're nearing the end of their postdoc and they are looking for, they want to finish up their project and they will need more funding support. So in this case, unfortunately, D2R does not plan to run specific senior postdoc or RA targeted funding programs. But if you email us, whoever asked this question, I will hopefully help you find other ways you can be funded. Of course, if your professor is working on DNA and RNA-based therapeutics, they can apply to the more broad and large D2R funding programs that can secure funding for their whole group, and then your salary can be paid through that program grant. So that's one way, but unfortunately, D2R doesn't plan to run specific research associate or senior postdoc funding programs specifically. And so someone asks, and this is a good opportunity to highlight, someone asks, can a supervisor support more than one application? No. In the 2025 edition of the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards, we are looking for supervisors to only support a maximum of one application in this competition. And as I mentioned, this is to enable us to support as many different research groups and research disciplines across this program as possible. This is an important question. Someone asks is, can we apply if the supervisor already has D2R funding? Yes, you can. I will highlight, and I believe this was explained in the call for application, if your salary is currently being funded through a training award through a D2R funded grant. Obviously, if you receive a postdoctoral scholar award, you won't be able to receive funding through both this program and the program that you're currently being paid from. So that money envelope from the training budget of your PI's grant will now be free to give to another person working on the research project. Or if there's no further trainees or students working on the research project that your PI has funding for, then their training budget will be shrunk to reflect you receiving a postdoctoral scholar award. So what is the approximate success rate is another question. And so that completely depends on how many applications we receive. However, so I can't really answer that for you today. However, we're again looking to fund around 8 successful applicants. And so, yeah, we had, for context, we currently have 60 people in this call. And so of course, not all those people might be eligible, but we hope to kind of fund probably a similar percent as we plan to in the Master's and Doctoral Scholar Award, which was a funding about approximately 20% of applicants. But of course, we're limited by that number of 8. So Daniel asks, if a PI isn't on the D2R eligible list, but is at a partner institution, how would they go about becoming D2R eligible? Are there specific criteria to meet for PIs to become D2R eligible? So the names at partner institutions who are on the D2R eligible list were many of those supported D2R initial application preparation or were hired specifically through D2R startup funds. And these eligible lists are supplied by the Office of the Vice President of Research and Innovation at each of these partner institutions. So if you believe that your PI would want to become D2R eligible, I'm not saying it's an easy process, but it would go through the Office of the VPRI at your institution itself. What is your definition of equity deserving groups? I am asking because my research might concern this population, but I am not sure. In terms of this, please reach out to us by email. And we can provide a specific example of the groups that are equity deserving groups considered by D2R, as is outlined in our EDI action plan, which will actually, if you're interested, will soon be online on the D2R website. But in terms of folding in equity deserving groups into your research description, I would suggest if you're wanting to target the certain equity deserving groups as defined by D2R, please reach out to us and we can provide that information clearly. An anonymous attendee asks, do you recommend including figures, either of data or a project overview in the research description? Yes. That was one of the pieces of feedback that we received many times from the evaluation of the Masters and Doctoral Scholar Awards, is that the inclusion of either preliminary data or figures with appropriate citations, of course, really do help outline the research proposal well. And of course, that would just have to be restricted to that 2-page maximum of the research proposal. And now Yegane asks that they are not certain about alignment of their research with D2R sectors. She's working on infectious disease, focusing on proteomics and cellular pathways. So it does include an infectious disease in a clinical study, but not with a DNA and RNA focus. Now, this generally, of course, in your specific case, Yegane, you would have to convince the reviewer or evaluator that your research is D2R aligned, but kind of more foundational research that is identifying potentially biomarkers in infectious disease that could be targets. So through the proteomics and cellular pathways you mentioned, if there is the potential for those biomarkers to be used as the target of an RNA therapeutic therapy, then I would say that there's an argument for it being D2R aligned. Alternatively, if you're developing methods that involve kind of more that can fall along the D2R research pipeline, that necessarily like you're developing a method that you feel like is D2R aligned, but maybe the thing you're studying isn't, there's definitely a way in which you can swing your research to be D2R aligned. Sabrina says, our lab received the D2R grant this year, and I am currently working on one of its aims. I would like to know if I am eligible to apply for a postdoctoral scholar award that overlaps with the research proposal funded by the D2R grant. Now, this is a good question. And in this case, built into the competition, there's nothing restricting you from applying. As it is open, you are able to apply if you are like you submit your project, you're allowed to apply if you're already working on a D2R in a D2R funded lab. So of course, there's going to be some overlap in those projects. However, I will note that as I mentioned earlier, if you receive funding through the Postdoctoral Scholar Award competition, your PI, if there's no one else working on that project, then their training budget might be changed to reflect you now receiving funding through the Postdoctoral Scholar Awards. Someone asked, how detailed is the methods description of the research proposal? For this one, I would really say that you need to provide the level of detail in the methods that you feel demonstrates to the evaluators that you're using the appropriate methods for answering the question, because that's what they're looking at. Is this person using the appropriate methods? And then elaborate on that as much as possible, allowed in that 2-page. So really you want to connect your objective with a clear method and explain why that method is the right one to study the objective. Someone asks, are there any fonts or space for the research proposal? Yes, Amina, I would direct you to the call for applications. I can't off the top of my head remember the margin size or the font size. It is Times New Roman font we asked for, but those details can be found on the online call for applications. And someone asks, can the postdoc supervisor be one of the references? I think I addressed this earlier, saying that this postdoc supervisor will be writing the 1-page letter of commitment. And so we're hopefully looking for you to find 2 other references that can support your application in addition to your postdoc supervisor supplying that commitment letter. Someone asks, what does it mean for a candidate to be visualizing and planning their future career? What that means is that you're we're looking to have people join the D2R training program and be awarded in the Scholar Awards to be those who aren't simply every day only focused on their research project, but are also wanting to and willing to devote some of their time to thinking about what comes next in their academic journey. And this could be looking to find a mentor for and developing proposals for an academic position. This could be someone who wants to go into industry and interested in learning there. But basically, broadly, it's like we're looking for people who want to devote time outside of their research activities to thinking about their future career in ideally the research space that's covered by D2R. Someone mentions if they finish their PhD in December 2022, are they eligible to submit? And so I will link that with the next question, which is based on the guideline within 5 years of the PhD completion by spring 2028. Yes, you're correct in their understanding that anyone, it's basically spring 2023 or later that we're likely looking at to be eligible to hold the entire 2 years of this award in in the funding window for this program. And so the person who asked if they finished their PhD in December 2022, if you're specifically want a more clear answer for your situation, please reach out to us by email and explain your situation, and we'll hopefully be able to provide a better answer. But broadly, I would say you're likely not going to be eligible to hold this award, unfortunately. Someone asks, does this funding cover the postdoc salary or is it meant for research related costs? Specifically, the 70K per year is the postdoc salary plus benefits. And so this does not meant to cover any research related costs that should be supported by your supervisor that you're working with. Someone asks if we're unable to find a supervisor in advance, can we still apply on our own and just list potential supervisors who are relevant to our areas of interest? And regarding the proposal, do we write it ourselves or should it be prepared in coordination with the supervisor? You will need a supervisor since the supervisor will be sponsoring this application. You need to have the supervisor in advance and they need to write the commitment letter. And of course, the supervisor is likely to want to contribute ideas to the research proposal. So I would suggest you do the work on this alongside your supervisor. Someone asks, can the 5-year eligibility criteria be based on project start date rather than spring 2026 start date? For this person, I'm honestly, the wording of your question, I don't fully understand what you mean. So please reach out to us by email and we'll be happy to provide a clear answer. Someone asked, will the results of the award be out before the deadline of FRQS CIHR applications, which is around October? At this point, no. It doesn't look, we likely won't know the results of this competition before October. And so I would suggest that if you are applying for FRQS or CIHR, there's the opportunity to say this in the application form. And so if you declare it here, we'll obviously cross-reference before we offer you the award if you've successfully received funding through another source, or before accepting this award, maybe you'd want to accept this over FRQ. So these will have to be conversations we have before you accept your award. Now I notice we're running out of time. We have 4 more questions that I'll just quickly try to get through before ending this webinar. And if you have to go, thank you for your participation today. I hope you found it informative and I hope you continue to engage with D2R. Now, to quickly get to these last few questions, if one of my references is coming from industry, how would that be reflected within the application evaluation? Would you rather have 2 academic references instead? No, since you've outlined that your current postdoc work involves some academic industry partnerships, it would be very valuable for evaluation of your application to include an industrial partnership. But I think the kind of expected it would be kind of expected that your PhD supervisor likely be one of your references by the evaluators. But certainly, if you feel that you have an industrial angle to your application, having a reference from industry is perfectly good. Is it recommended to apply with a project already supported by D2R to the PI, or is it better to apply with something different? In this case, I would suggest it largely doesn't matter. As long as your research is aligned with D2R, it's great if your research is already being supported, or your PI is already being supported, or not if you feel like you're working on a D2R aligned research project. Someone specifically asks if their research is focused on the development of vaccines for infectious diseases. Are they eligible to apply? So here you've outlined your previous research was focused on this, but for the postdoc award, we're really wondering, is your current and future postdoc research aligned? So you'd have to expand and explain how your current research is aligned with one of D2R's foundational axes and the D2R initiative in general. Um, Someone also asks that they've been receiving the FRQ postdoctoral fellowship since May 2025. Can they apply for the D2R fellowship and cancel their FRQ fellowship if they get a positive response by D2R? Strictly following the application, um, uh, strictly following the application rules, we state that you cannot be holding an award and apply for this award because, frankly, we're looking to support as many distinct individuals across the D2R community as possible. So given you already have FRQ postdoctoral fellowship funding, I would suggest you don't apply for this award, as we are likely to choose to award people who already don't have successfully funded projects. And the last question from Dana, if the postdoc supervisor is the same as their PhD supervisor, should we still use them a reference or find two other referees? I now know why this question came in at the last minute, as I just mentioned that you'd be expected to include your PhD supervisor as a reference, likely by reviewers. In this case, this might be one scenario where I would suggest maybe it makes sense to have your postdoc supervisor provide a reference as they're also your PhD supervisor. But then I would ask for, or I would think that it'd be best if your current supervisor kind of targeted the commitment letter towards describing your potential working on this project for your postdoc, even though that might be a continuation of your PhD project, and focus the letter of reference more on you during your PhD during that period to try to just give the evaluators two distinct angles of why you are an excellent PhD student and why you're an ideal fit for this postdoc project. And so with that, I think we've gotten through all of the evaluation, all the Q&A questions today. And so I wanted to thank you all for your participation. If you have any further questions or further interest, please reach out to d2r.training@mcgill.ca. And this email can also be found on the online call for applications. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.